Hi everybody, Mature Simmer here. So welcome to another episode in the edition of the Non-Aviator Flight Sim series. So this focus is really to help those of you who want to get into flight sim, who, like me, have come to it without an aviation background and maybe trying to figure out how to make progress or make heads or tails of things and what to do or when you run into certain issues. So today I'm going to take a look at specifically approach charts, but in the process here I'm showing you another free tool that is available. So if you don't want to pay for a Navigraph subscription, SkyVector, if you fly in the US, is actually what I was using for many months before I finally went ahead and purchased a Navigraph subscription. And I would perhaps suggest the same path to folks because what this allowed me to do is determine, do I really enjoy flight sim enough that if I invest the $89 a year that it costs for Navigraph, that I'm not going to feel upset and say, oh, I'm never going to use this, I'm not enjoying this. So to give yourself some time, I thought it would be helpful to show a free tool instead of one of the paid tools. So what we're looking at here is the FAA sectionals basically stitched together just like they are in Navigraph. But one of the things that a tool like SkyVector gives you is it actually gives you the real-time information that is coming. So these blue boxes are basically weather warnings, and you can kind of look at kind of what they're looking at and so forth. And so, it's the Storm Prediction Center and things that are going on. So it just lets you know and gives you some information ahead of time so that you can determine if you're flying in that area, if it's important to you. But the thing I wanted to point out, because this doesn't happen that often, is these things are kind of like temporary, their TFRs are temporary flight restrictions. So you can see this will be live in 1 day, 6 hours. These over here are going to be live in 2 days, live in 3 days, live in 2 days, and so forth. What those are flight restrictions that occur because of a specific event, usually. And given the situation or the time frame we're in right now in the US, I'm guessing these are campaign flights for the president and places they'll be heading to and visiting at some point. So, and this is around an Air Force base in Georgia. This is Wilmington, Delaware, which is kind of the hometown of the president and so forth. And then this is up in Michigan, which is a big battleground state, and it's near Detroit and so forth, because you can see KDTW, Detroit Wayne. So definitely talking to auto workers, talking to the military, all those things seem to make sense. And then this is kind of the security zone that just exists around Washington, D.C. all the time. So that's kind of the red circle and so forth. So Navigraph, I don't know if it will provide that information. I've not seen that specifically. I'm guessing it would, but I just wanted to point that out before we jump into kind of the crux of the video here. So in general, if you were planning a flight in SkyVector, you'd go to Flight Plan up here, you'd hit Departure. So let's say we are flying from Orlando, and you just type the airport and tab, and you can see it moves the map and does things there. And then we'll go, I'm just picking random airports. So KMCI to Kansas City. So what that immediately does then is it draws a straight line. You'll know basically your rough heading if you were flying direct, 325 degrees, 932 nautical miles. So that gets you the base information you need. But then to plan out what you're doing, and more specifically what this episode is talking about, is when you're approaching and landing, you're going to look at your destination airport, and you can see as I hover over this, I'm going to get links to the diagrams. So the airport diagram is always just going to give you the taxiway and so forth. But then the ILS procedures are there, and you also then have departure procedures, terminal arrivals, and so forth. This video I'm going to focus on ILS approaches. So we're simply going to pick one of these, and so you'll see it brings up this chart. So if I open up and zoom in, there's a lot of information on these charts. Certainly if you're a real-world pilot and you'd want to make sure you understood all of it and really knew what you were doing. But again, the focus here is non-aviators to be able to enjoy flight sim, give you kind of the details of what you need to worry about so that you can effectively fly. So this localizer DME, this is what you're putting in or what you're using in your nav radio, your navigation radio, so that you're getting the correct signal. So, you know, on airliners and so forth, it's going to automatically program that in and so forth. And this again is for runway 1 right. As I've talked about in runway headings and so forth, this means that this runway is pointing basically 10 degrees. So it's not quite due north, it's a little bit off to the east. And you can see, you know, how that is lining up here. The other things that are helpful to know are these elevations. So the touchdown zone, the airport elevation, and the runway length. So that's telling you that the runway is 9,500 feet long. And then basically you're at 1,000 feet is what you're going to be looking at when you're going to be landing. You know, there's information here about if you miss approaches, what your proper procedure is, and so forth. But as you're getting used to flight sim, and if you're not flying on VAT sim or things like that, like if you miss the runway, go around, use the pattern that we talked about in the pattern video to go ahead and route yourself back around and line yourself up again for another attempt. Again, I'll probably cover some of the other things on some of these, maybe if we talk about other charts and so forth, or other things that you need to understand. But really what I want to focus on here is the actual ILS landing. And so we're going to look at this section here. We're going to basically kind of ignore everything else. That's really kind of the approach that you're coming in with and so forth. That'll be a separate video, otherwise this just gets too long. And so this also is giving you kind of the runway layout. So 1 right is here. You can see, you know, you've got 2 parallel runways here at this airport and a crossing runway as well. And again, 9,500 is the length as we talked about, and you can see 1 left is 1,801 feet, so it's a little bit longer. But what you were looking for is kind of where do you enter ILS. And so what this is showing, because it has a line on top and a line below, like it's keeping you right at 3,000. It's telling you approach WUVOR at 3,000 feet. And so you can kind of coordinate those things on the overall chart here. So WUVOR is here, and it's the same thing, 3,000, same setup, and so forth. And so basically you're going to pass WUVOR, ribs, hot B, and then you're heading into the runway. And so what this is showing you is the heights that you want to be at various points. So 3,000 at WUVOR, above 2,900 at ribs, and really kind of this is the point where you're likely going to be running with any ILS assistance that you have in your aircraft. And then here at hot B, above 1,700, and then you're going to go ahead and land after that. You know, and the runway is here. So once again, to follow more proper procedure and so forth, this indication is if, you know, these are distances from the runway. So you basically need to kind of add everything up. So 0.1 miles, is the inner marker. 0.3 is another marker. Another 0.4 gets you there. But here, basically a little less than a half a mile from the runway. If you are not in a position that you can see the runway, that you can feel that you have full control of the landing, this is kind of your point where you should then do a go around and basically abort, let the tower know, hey, I'm not going to go, and you take off, and then you follow these, and these kind of are giving you the information here, which is really explained up here in the missed approach. You're going to climb to 1500, then you're going to do a climbing right turn to 4000, direct, anks, vortac, and hold. And so that's what that's telling you. Climb 1500, then a right turn to 4000 to anks. So it kind of gives you a little cheat sheet for the missed approach that's up there, but the details of what they want you to do are there. And obviously there were more things that we didn't cover. All of this down here then is kind of giving you information to enter into your computer for your ILS information. So in most cases, this is the ILS, this is localizer, this is circling. So you're really looking just at this line, and most of them are in the US are going to be 200, and that's kind of really the number you're focusing on here. And that goes in and basically it calibrates your system. I frankly don't understand all the details of it, but again, to flight sim and so forth, you don't necessarily need to know that. You're just looking for that. Sometimes you're going to see 220, sometimes you're going to see 300. You're just going to go and enter that into the appropriate place in your flight management computer, and that will then make everything work out. But again, if you go ahead and kind of roughly add this up, we're almost a mile out here. We're adding another 1.2 miles, and another 3.7, another 1. So basically between these, we're like 6 miles out is where ribs is going to be. And so again, you're going to be at 2,900 feet, heading down to about 1,000 with landing. And the glide slope is usually figured out at 3 degrees, and I believe that is what this is, the angle 3.0. And so that is kind of the commonly accepted descent angle that you're coming in at. But that is what you really need to know on an ILS chart to be able to utilize the information to land. Again, we'll cover other pieces in other topics that might be useful, that might be fun to know, might be fun to try to learn how to do if you want to get a little bit more real in what you're doing with your flying. But to get you going on ILS, that's the data you need to get off the chart to be able to appropriately utilize this. If you've enjoyed the video but haven't dropped a like, please consider doing that. If you are not a subscriber, please consider that, and I will see you next time.